Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info. In 2016, Lawrence Batley Theatre in Huddersfield, Yorkshire, decided to produce its first ever professional pantomime, Cinderella, bringing in an experienced team of director Joyce Branner, with whom we spoke on this podcast last year, and one of the UK's leading pantomime writers, Andrew Pollard. The experiment was a great success, and so the theatre has employed the same team for this year's Jack and the Beanstalk. Andrew Pollard is taking a year off from playing Dame at Greenwich Theatre as he is touring in the new Vic Theatre production of Around the World in 80 Days as Phileas Fogg, but he is still involved as writer in several pantos this year, including this one. I spoke to Andrew and asked him what his take is on the well-known fairy tale story for Huddersfield.
Well, I haven't really got a particular take on it. I always think, sometimes the stories, you can find a slightly different way of doing it, but usually it kind of comes from whatever the characters are, So in some versions, the cow has been almost like one of the kind of Tommy the Cat figures. There's talks, or it just depends really when you kind of sit down with the theatre what they want. And I think one of the great things about it's great to be writing for Lawrence Batley because there hasn't been a professional panto in Huddersfield, which is a big major northern town.
Yeah,
they haven't had a panto for quite some time. So it's great having a professional panto there, and I think really that they're looking for something that's quite a traditional show. That was certainly from last year. What they found worked. I think they want, they're sort of happy to do that. So really, all the characters are there. It's just in the character choices, I suppose, that can be different. So we haven't gone wildly off track in terms of, it's not set in the future or anything like that. It's pretty traditional, really.
But you're writing, what is it, 4 or 5 pantos is it this year you've got on of yours?
I've 6. I've done 6 this year.
6?
Yeah, I know, quite a feat.
They're all for different venues that all have different requirements, like, for instance, Hornchurch uses actor musicians, and this one you say is quite traditional. So where do you start with that? I assume you need a lot of meetings with the theatres and the directors.
Yeah, I mean that's really what happens is that we very early on in the year you'll have a meeting. I mean sometimes they'll say to me, do you have a version of whatever, and I'll send them. If I've got 2 versions of it, I'll send them. And sometimes they might say, oh, we like that aspect, we don't like that. But inevitably, actually, you end up sort of writing a new script. Not always, but I sometimes obviously reuse comedy scenes if I know. If I've done them at Greenwich and I know they work, you can kind of store that away and go, well, that fits in there or that fits in there. But yeah, it is sitting down with the theatre and knowing what they want. And I think somewhere like Hornchurch, they had a very particular way of doing it for a long time, and it's been a new artistic director, and they wanted to bring something slightly different, and they're starting to go slightly more into actor muso world. So all those places have their different feelings and demands, and so you have to sit down and chat through all that.
But some of the big pantos, they take the same titles to different cities year after year, and they just change a few local references. But your scripts tend to be a lot more rewritten than that, don't they?
They do. I mean, there's been the odd one which has just sort of almost been the same. So actually, the one I did, a Cinderella I did for Salisbury a couple of years ago, they did a pretty similar version in Hornchurch last year, but there were tweaks. Inevitably, there's always change, and it's to do with cast size or whatever as well. And also, panto is nothing if not a practical art, in terms of writing. So often, at the Lawrence Batley, they hire in the sets, and so often I have to write round what those sets are as well.
Yeah.
So there are all kinds of practical, constraints, I suppose. But I quite like that because I think sometimes that forces you to be slightly more creative, And it doesn't mean that it has to be just sort of off the peg. You can within those things you can do you can do all kinds of things.
So you might get a request, say, like, we've got this cheap back cloth, can you get Cinderella to visit a desert island or something?
Well, yes. Sometimes there are things like that, or particular costumes as well. A couple of times I've done it where, especially with the Dame, you're given a set of costumes that have come with the set, and I try and sort of make them all work and give them a reason for being, rather than just coming on. And sometimes that can take you down, interesting little roads,
Yeah.
So it's there's all kinds of different things that come at you, And sometimes at Salisbury this year, the designer started quite early, and his take on the look of it, also sort of took us down a certain route as well. So there's all manner of ways. So I have to be pretty flexible.
The ones you've done at Greenwich, you use some of the traditional titles, but you tend to intersperse them with some that are a bit less familiar, like Red Riding Hood and Robinson Crusoe. Yeah. So how does that work out for you? Do they go down as well?
They do, actually. I mean, we're in that fantastic position now at Greenwich where people like what we give them. So, the creative team has been the same for quite a long time, and we've just got this fantastically loyal audience.
Yeah.
And actually, we've found that it doesn't matter that it's a not particularly well-known title. They're just going to come and see the local panto, and they trust us. So that's great for me, because it does mean we can change it up, and we're not repeating every 5 years. I've done. Obviously, I'm having a year off this year, but I've done 11, and inevitably we have repeated a couple of times. But the whole it means you can just sort of try out different things and write for certain people as well. Anthony Spargo, who's been our baddie for quite a few years, it's great writing for somebody is so creative and what they can do. So it's a luxury actually to be able to just kind of go, let's try this, let's do a title that doesn't get done. And I think it's a shame as well. I think it's a shame a lot of these titles have sort of died out or fallen by the wayside. It's hard to know quite why this has happened, But even now, I know like the Palladium are doing Dick Whittington, but I read a thing quite recently where somebody had they'd ask various schools about titles of pantos. And a lot of kids had never heard of Dick Whittington, and nor had the teachers. That kind of story is, sort of less prevalent now for some reason. But I kind of find if as long as there is an interesting story with it, as long as you plot it right, and you've got enough sort of comedy and all that, people just sort of tend to go with it.
Yeah, we've got at least 2 Dick Whittingtons in Greater Manchester this year. We've got the big one at the Opera House with John Barrowman, and we've got and we've got Oldham Coliseum as well. They're on Dick Whittington, so maybe it's coming back.
Well, I think it's never quite gone away, but I think it's not probably quite as popular as it used to be. But certainly a lot of them. Like Mother Goose has really kind of fallen by the wayside, and that only tends to get done by places like us, I think, where. Often, I suppose, in rep theatres, for want of a better word, sometimes the Dame is still quite the central figure. Yeah. Whereas I think in commercial pantos, she's become less of a central figure because there aren't as many names who can do Dame anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of thing, has meant that those kind of stories have slightly disappeared.
What's your take on the traditional roles in panto? Because they are changing. Like the female principal boy seems to be dying off a bit. They've still got one at Oldham, but a lot of them have become male now. So what should we have?
Well, at Greenwich, we've never had a female playing the title role. Playing Dick or whatever. We've always had male, and that kind of came from the theatre. They felt they wanted to take it in a certain way, and I think it's hard to say, isn't it? There's something delightful about that topsy-turvy world, I think. But I think when you have, given now, that kids are, they're very up on stories, and Disney, of course, is a big influence, it seems, in all these kind of traditional stories, and many pantos seem to kind of take from Disney occasionally. But I think, if you're telling a love story, obviously it's much easier if it's going to be a boy and a girl, you can take that a little bit further. Whereas I suppose, when there's two females singing together, a love story, you sort of lighten it a little bit. But I don't necessarily have a preference, but none of the theatres I write for have a female playing principal boy anymore. It is few and far between. I'm not sure how many sort of big commercial ones do that anymore. But I think, again, panto, it stays the same, but it changes, doesn't it? And that's why it's still with us. It kind of bends to the times, I think. And people have always said, "Oh, it's never as good as it used to be," and it's still here,
Yes.
And it has that wonderful way of adapting itself. And also, if you look through the history books, I mean, there were men playing the male parts a lot, long time. Even in Victorian times, some of the pantos had men playing those parts, not just women. And I think, again, that tradition came, it seemed to me, from music hall and that side. So, it adapts and changes, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, a lot of the original traditions of panto did come from that music hall variety type scene, didn't they?
Yeah,
a vehicle.
I mean, I think pretty much that the pantos we do now are from that tradition, aren't they? They do have their roots in that. But, it's that thing, I think people sometimes say, especially with the dame, well, you can't have a female dame. And I think you can. I think it depends on the person. It's always funny. I'm dressing up as a woman. I don't know why, but especially it's completely entrenched in British culture for some reason. But you can have, this year at Greenwich, it's Cinderella, and we've got a male and a female playing younger sisters. So, it works brilliantly, it's because they're both very funny in their own different ways.
Yeah. So when you're writing a panto, you've got to try and get this balance, I suppose, between there are certain traditions that you've got to uphold, and there are certain ways that you want to push it in new directions, so you're not just repeating yourself or repeating what other people have done. So how do you get that balance? What's essential that's got to be in there?
Well, I mean, for me, I think, the plot, for me, you've got to have a good story. I think some pantos sort of, treat it very lightly, to the detriment of the show. I think, because I think it drives it. If you've got something motoring away, some plot, it helps you. So for me, I think a strong story is always good. And then off that, you do hang the comedy things. It's a shame, and actually even at Greenwich, we've rarely done like a big slapstick scene in terms of mess and things, because basically they just haven't got the resources to do that. And because it's not the doing of it, it's the cleaning up of it.
Yes.
And and it's a real shame, because I'd love to do more sort of big slapstick pieces, but I always do have, in Act 1 somewhere, there is a big comedy turn. There's some kind of comedy scene that's a knockabout in some way or other. And usually I try and have one in each half. And I mean, it's just about that for me. I think it's about having plotting it quite strongly. You're leading up to something dramatic happening at the end of Act 1, so that kind of helps you as well. The setup of all the characters, I think it's quite nice to meet them all individually. Yeah. And just kind of say hello to them, and just really sort of riff off the story. You can go on little tangents, but I think you're always trying to make that plot work for you, and push the story along.
And what about a good panto performer? Because I've seen lots of performers, and you can tell the difference between the ones who deliver lines in the direction of where the audience is and the ones that really feel like they're engaging with the audience and responding to them. So what makes a good panto performer, do you think? Yeah,
it's funny that, isn't it? I think you need to have a touch of the kind of variety performer about you. I think, you really do have to be able to reach through that fourth wall, don't you? I mean, I think, pretty much all the characters do. I know, I always say when I'm directing the panto, because there's an element sometimes where everybody wants to be funny, they all want to get the gags. And I sort of say to people, a bit like a football team, know your position. Yes. And it doesn't mean the prince can't be funny, but, you're not the ad libber gag meister. Yeah. you leave that to the other people, and some of the characters are built more strongly to be that conduit between the audience and the stage, you know. And for me, when I do it at Greenwich, we don't really often have a kind of silly Billy character or anything, and I suppose I take the brunt of that, and so it's me doing the asides and doing all that kind of stuff, you know. But I think every performer who does panto, you know, that they do need to have that ability to not be scared of the audience and respond. It doesn't mean they have to kind of ad lib, but they have to be able to gauge them and go along with it and be a little bit flexible, I suppose. It's funny, sometimes I've worked with people who, you know, they're used to doing a play or something, and the rigidity of that, they kind of cling to that. And when they do panto and there might be an ad lib or something might go wrong, they panic, you know. And I think it's you've got to have that sense of fun about it, and that's one of the things I love about it, because, you know, I think as long as you share with the audience, you know, they will come along with you. You know, if something goes wrong, or, you know, they love it, but you have to share it. I don't like in jokes within the company. I just think if the audience don't know what's being laughed at, then you're dead in the water.
Yeah.
You know, you're constantly sharing. So yeah, I think it is a real kind of openness. You know, that you've just got to have that ability and you know, warmth. And I know it gets, you know, panto often gets derided, but it's been so interesting. You know, sometimes, especially the amount I've done at Greenwich, you know, we've had performers who, you know, this is about a team effort. I'm not saying this comes from me, but they've come out of it better performers than when they started, because I think panto teaches you so much about responding to an audience.
Yes. Yeah.
And, you know, they're often slightly more relaxed about it, not saying that it's a kind of back foot performance, you know, they're still, you know, being engaged, but I think panto very quickly, you learn to kind of, you learn different techniques and learn to respond. So I think it's a great training ground, personally.
What about adult jokes in panto? Because I think, was it Kenneth Allen Taylor recently said he doesn't like that, but I know a lot of, particularly dames, they'll put in through a few cheeky gags that only the adults will get. Is there a room for that in panto?
Well, I mean, it's a funny one, is it? Because this is about taste, isn't it? And I think, you know, taste is you know, it's a fluid thing, really. I mean, I don't like, let's say, adult jokes, but I think a bit of sauciness occasionally, or a little bit of innuendo, is fine. But I think you have to be careful. But it's quite interesting with the ones I write. You know, there are levels of that, and, you know, there are some at Greenwich. You know, you get that thing where sometimes we've got mainly an adult audience, but I never play to that. But there are little. A little bit of sauciness, I'd say, occasionally, but not an adult joke. I don't like that at all. Yeah. But with some of the other pantos, that, you know, they really don't like any of that at all, and so, you know, I have to, I just have to write to what they require, really. Yeah. I mean, I think it's the main thing is being just silly and daft, I think, you know. For me, but you just have to be aware who your audience is, I think, and you know, as long as it's not a kind of the adult jokes, I think a little bit of sauciness occasionally, for me, is fine, you know. I mean, I don't know whether you saw the Palladium one last year with Julian Clary, which was, you know, I mean, I have to say, I thought it was hilarious. But I couldn't believe what they were getting away with, you know. Yeah. But then I look at that audience, and you probably could have counted the number of children on one hand, you know. Yes, yeah. So it's
knowing your audience, then, really.
I suppose it is, yeah. But even so, I think what you're trying to do, I think, is, even if you've got quite a big adult audience, you are trying to turn them into kids.
Yeah.
That's what I think. You know, you're trying to make everybody as stupid as possible, lose their inhibitions, and be silly, shouting out and doing all that kind of stuff. And I think sometimes we've had audiences who will read things into stuff that we haven't seen, and you can just maybe do a look, and that's all you need, if they've found something in the script which you hadn't thought of. Yeah. But I think for me it's about everybody becomes a kid really and becomes silly.
Yeah, there are some things that have got to change with panto because attitudes and sensibilities change. Like last year I saw on Aladdin where some of the gags that were playing on Chinese pronunciation looked like straight out of the 70s, and also with Robinson Crusoe you can't get away from the fact that it's got a Man Friday in there. So how do you deal with that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think you just have to. I just think you have to be aware. You have to look at it like something like Robinson Crusoe. I did a version last year for Chipping Norton, and we chatted through that. They wanted to do that title and look at it, and it became about them helping each other out, so that the view of that somebody is a native, but this guy had many more skills than Robinson Crusoe, because he knew the land, he knew the place, and so it became about a kind of buddy thing, and they were more than equals, and it was really nice to do that, and in a way, I think given our time sometimes with Brexit and all that, to say there are other cultures out there, and they have their own culture, their own skills, their own sensibilities, and so it became a little bit about that without being, too down your throat. Yeah. But you do have to, you have to be aware. And I think, that those kind of, things with, like you said, of the kind of Chinese names and all that, I think maybe that's going to sort of die out really. Yeah. Because, we're more aware and we're more inclusive, that our audiences, the demographic is different, and you have to reflect that. You have to reflect the multicultural society you're in, I think.
Yeah, I suppose it's like what you were saying about Man Friday. It's a bit like the way principal girls seem to be changing. They're not the damsels in distress who have to be rescued by the man. They have a bit more what they now refer to as agency, don't they?
Yeah, I get. Yeah, exactly. And I get that a lot. That's one of the important things. Often with the theatres I write, that's a big thing. They want that. To be reflected, and that girls can do stuff that boys can do too, and it's not they're just waiting there to be rescued. You do have to reflect that. Even with Cinderella, I mean, you've got to be careful because she can just be seen as just a victim. And the past couple I've written, I've been careful to kind of, she has to find her inner strength, for want of that word, and decide to fight back with the help of other people, And I think that's great. This is the reason panto survives, because within its format, you can change it and it can reflect the times you're in. I think that is one of the beauties of it, really.
One of the main ingredients, probably from its variety roots, is music. And there have been some pantos that have had songs specially written for them, but I know some panto enthusiasts are dead against that, saying it's got to be music that's chosen to fit the audience and to fit the era and the story as well. So what's your view on the music?
Well, I mean, I've written, up until a couple of years ago at Salisbury, it was specially written music, and that was the first time I'd sort of been involved in something like that. I mean, for me personally, I like the eclectic approach, pop songs and tradition, whatever, Motown, or all that thing. I think, for me, panto is a weird ragbag of things anyway, and takes from so many theatrical genres. And you've got your little political jokes and your slapstick. It's such a mix. I think the music, if the music's eclectic too, it's all part of it for me. Yeah. And I love, me and Steve Mark Quick, who's the MD at Greenwich, we spend a lot of time on our songs and making them work, and we have great fun in trying to make them work, and sometimes be witty with some of the modern songs, or it's great fun that. But I think they're just slightly different beasts. I think when it's specially written music, I think they sort of veer more towards a musical for me. And also I think, they're slightly harder because I think if you've got a show that's got songs that a lot of people know, they're on your side much quicker.
Yes.
And things like the principal boy and girl singing a song, if it's a song the kids know, the battle's half won,
Yeah.
I think that really works. Having said that, the ones I worked on, they did work, and the kids got behind it, and we tried, in a way like a musical, we'd do reprises of stuff, so that by the second half, people would have heard that song and so felt slightly familiar with it, so there was a kind of familiarity. But, again, it's just taste, isn't it, of the theatre and what they're used to. I think there was a little bit of resistance at Salisbury when they decided to use found songs rather than specially written. But then they also found a slightly new audience that came along who loved that.
Yeah.
So it's just about how things change.
Now this year you're not doing panto. You're touring with the brilliant Around the World in 80 Days, which I saw at the Royal Exchange last year.
Great.
Which it's got its fair share of slapstick, but not really from you, is it? From your sidekick.
From Mike Hugo, who plays Pastor 2. Yeah.
Yes, who we I think we nominated him for a Manchester Theatre Award, actually.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But are you going to miss panto this year? I know you're involved with a lot of pantos, but are you going to miss performing it?
I kind of am. Yeah, I went to see Greenwich's yesterday. We watched a school show, and it was just weird, not to be there, not to be on stage, and actually just seeing it from outside, the whole thing. It was a very strange. But I suppose the thing is, I am working over Christmas, and so there's still a feeling that you're involved in a Christmas event, even though it's not necessarily a Christmas show. But I kind of am missing it a little bit, and I'm actually excited to be going back and doing it next year. But then the other great thing is, I can, especially like Huddersfield, which is, a new venture for the theatre. This year I can get to see it. I didn't actually see it at all last year, so I get to, see it, and we can chat through things, and I can see how it's working in that venue, which is quite important, really.
Yeah.
So in a way, in terms of my panto career, that kind of stuff is great, and this has allowed me to be able to kind of go and see a few more, and just kind of get a feel of these places, and it can only help you, further if they do another one the next year. They ask me, you get a bit more of a sense of how it's working.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that it always amazes me with panto that when it works like nothing else.
Yeah.
I mean, last year at Huddersfield, it was very interesting because we had a meeting afterwards. After they'd done it, we had a kind of get together of all the production staff and all that as a kind of debrief, I suppose. And they were gobsmacked. The letters they got, people coming up to the box office, making sure that the box office told, the artistic director and all that, what great fun they'd had.
Yeah.
It grabs people when it works in such a particular way, and it was so lovely to know that, and that they put faith in, that they'd kind of gone out on a limb and decided they would produce their own panto, which is an expensive thing to do. Yeah. And for them, it seemed to pay off in spades, and they just had the most amazing feedback. And when it works like that, there is nothing quite like it, because it's, it is that thing, isn't it? It's complete. Anybody can go, any member of the family. It can be, or a couple of adults can go on their own, but it works for everybody when it works well, I think.
Jack and the Beanstalk, written by Andrew Pollard and directed by Joyce Branner, will run at Lawrence Batley Theatre in Huddersfield from the 8th of December 2017 to the 6th of January 2018. Andrew's other pantos this year include Cinderella at Greenwich Theatre from the 17th of November 2017, another Jack and the Beanstalk at Salisbury Playhouse from the 2nd of December 2017, and Beauty and the Beast at Queen's Theatre Hornchurch from the 30th of November 2017, all finishing on the 7th of January 2018. Andrew can be seen on tour in Around the World in 80 Days until January. See www.80dayslive.com for details. You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.